All right, just a bit and we will be started. Now this is the situation for me. As things stand right now, I have a technical problem that I can't solve. And so I'm having to use different software to upload after I have given a talk rather than doing live streaming. The situation is, if somebody knows of where I can get a technician to come in to help me, that would be very helpful. Whoever helps me has to know about Apple computers, Blackmagic design hardware for integrating audio and video and presentation, and OBS, which is the open broadcasting software. I have spent hours and hours over many days trying to solve this problem and have not been able to do so. So help would be wonderful. All right, we're going to continue now working with questions and answers. I don't know whether we're going to get them all answered tonight or not. What happens is questions come up and I like to flow with them. There are no really short answers with me. And I think the way I'm doing it is all right because it gives a broader understanding. All right, we'll begin. The first question is, you stated in past talks a few years ago that we can help those who have died by providing insights and information. But don't they have a larger perspective than we have? And when they process experiences from their lives, and ours if it involved interaction with them, aren't they provided a more objective picture of reality than from their own past perspective? So how is it we can help them rather than the other way around? That's actually several questions, but in the answering of the general of it, it will be all right. All right. We are not changed greatly by death. Our character is still our character. If we are stubborn people, we'll be stubborn after we die. Now, some things do change. We're not in a physical body, and everything that has been from the coming to birth, been moving forward, is now unwinding, and we don't have control of that. We have carried the thought form, which is called an archetype. We've carried that as far as it can be carried, and then we let go. And then the cycle starts all over again after we process the experience that we have just gone through. Now, some things do change. Now, if we have a physical condition that keeps us from certain kind of experience, that will change with death. Like suppose, for example, a person is brain damaged. Suppose they had a motorcycle accident or something like that, and their brain was non-functional. After they die, that won't be the case anymore. They will be able to function as perfectly working human beings, except for the fact that they're unwinding. and it's very hard to do forward going work. So back to the original thought, death doesn't change our character radically. Yes, we do have a much larger perspective available from the spiritual worlds, but not everybody is capable of taking advantage of that. If someone was small-minded and thought in terms of simple day-to-day affairs only, they may not be able to take advantage of all of the spiritual capacities that are available to them. So it requires an education. Now, over the years, people who work as invisible helpers, either those among the living who are in waking consciousness, serving while their body is sleeping, or those among the dead who have gained ability, or great spiritual teachers, they have been teaching people so that more people can take advantage of that wider perspective that is available from the larger spiritual worlds. But there are also a lot of other things that come up with it. For example, in wartime, when somebody gets blown to bits, the invisible helpers, they think that was what they think their body is what it will be. And they think, after they find themselves in the desire world, that they think they have a smashed up body. And then an invisible helper will tell them that by setting their consciousness to what they want it to be, they can have whatever form they like. And as a consequence, a lot of them try to look like movie stars or things like that, but they don't always have the consciousness to be able to hold that. Now, yes, in regard to another part of this question, objectivity is realized when we retrospect the events of life. When we go from consequences back to cause, we see any event or we see any impulse or action, we can see it objectively because we have seen it going forward and we've also seen it going back. But that objectivity isn't immediately available either. What is happening is that as we are going through purgatory and first heaven, and we're releasing the energy and the experiences from the experiences of the past life, the meaning of that, the soul essence of it, gets absorbed into the spirit, which is the true self, which is the truth knower. But that doesn't happen immediately. For most people, that doesn't happen until they reach third heaven in the world of the abstract subdivision of the world of thought. And some people don't even get it there because they cannot ideate. So there is objectivity, but it is not immediately available. Everything has to sink into the spirit and become part of the spirit. The soul has to become part of the spirit. Now, even though we have seen an action from cause to consequence and from consequence to cause, and the objectivity of that has sunk in, we don't always really learn a lesson. We think we know better, but often it doesn't happen that way. So it is that in our next rebirth, suppose a person had an addictive personality, and became addicted to something and dissipated their life. They go after death, they go through purgatory, and they can see the consequences from back to the cause, and the spirit realizes, wow, you can get attached and you can get addicted to material things. But it has been learned, but you have to learn it in all of your being, so that in the next rebirth, the person is again tempted by an addiction, the possibility of an addiction. And if they have really learned their lesson, they don't fall for it. Now, there are several things in life that in myself that are problematic for a lot of people that are not problematic for me. And I know in myself, though I can't explain how I know, but I know that there are certain things I will not do. One of them, for example, is I will not get myself involved with psychic negativity, things like mediumship or possession or channeling or those kinds of things where you lose control. And there are indications in my horoscope that I had a history of that sort of thing in the past, and in this life it's a trial to see whether I will fall into that again. And the way it has worked out is I do not at all care to do any of those things. Now, the question is about people among the so-called dead helping us or us helping them. We have a toehold. When we are anchored in a physical body, we're held in place. When you're out of your body, especially in death, when everything is unwinding, you don't have that capacity. It takes a very well-trained and strong will to be able to focus in the way we can focus when we are in our physical bodies. So it is a much more difficult thing for someone among the dead to be able to convey something to us. And usually what it takes is a really strong desire. And I'm sure everybody has heard of those things where somebody from the dead comes back and saves a child or something like that, save their own child from some kind of harm, because there is that desire, and in that desire the person had the rare ability to come back to the physical and change things in the physical so that could be done. Now, even for us affecting others in the spiritual world, we're talking about the dead especially, most people don't realize they can do that. Most people don't see the spiritual worlds and don't even believe that they're capable of projecting, not realizing that all of their thoughts are available to someone on the other side, especially if those thoughts are directed to the individual. I used to play around with it in a way that was not most highly respectful, but I would know when people who are out of their body in sleep would come to visit me while I was still awake in my body, and I would play little games with them. Not the most, it's not highly unethical, but it's really not a highly ethical thing to do either. If you know someone, you can give information to them. This is why we do spiritual exercises. We do spiritual exercises to develop the capacity to participate in the entire spiritual evolutionary creation. And we can do that in many ways. And this means we can participate in the spiritual worlds even though we can't see them now. Just knowing what we know about from studying mysticism as we have in these many talks. This is a 172nd talk. If one has ingested the basic ideas from these talks, they know enough about the spiritual worlds that they can participate and help others. So if you have the time and if you have the wherewithal and you have practiced concentration, you can focus things into the inner worlds. Some people even read books to the dead because they can get information about the worlds that they're living in from people who are living here, and then they can understand their life in the spiritual worlds. Now, that's not to say that there aren't schools and things like that for people to learn about the spiritual worlds, but it's one of those cases where the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. There are not enough people who are knowledgeable about the spiritual worlds to go around to help all of the people that need help or to educate people that are open and willing to be educated. All right, so attention, being able to control attention is what is necessary, whether it is from the dead communicating with us or us communicating with the dead. Clearly, from what I have said about my own experience, the dead communicating through a medium or through channeling or things like that is a definite no-no, because that weakens the person who is the medium, and it's just an ugly business all around, and the benefits that come from it are not worth the losses and the sacrifices that are made in such a thing. All right, we're ready for another question. This is a question of a totally different flavor. How do we exercise our spiritual willpower to become the captain of our soul and the master of our own fate? Suppose we want to temporarily set aside in this life the law of cause and effect, any previous plans or agreements that there were set up, anything whatsoever that might be shaping our destiny now, and instead we want to declare it null and void, no matter what the consequences, and decree that we desire is, all right? And if we are able to muster that amount of clarity, desire, and emotion around whatever that destiny is, how do we get the physical world to create it quickly? This is quite an ambitious question. Let's address the first thing that's talked about, spiritual willpower. Spiritual willpower is not what most people think it is. Spiritual willpower is extremely subtle. In fact, it is the most subtle faculty that we have. And we have difficulty controlling our physical bodies, which are the grossest a place of our tool or ability to do things in the creation, to say nothing of controlling energy forces or desires or things like that. The will is the most difficult to get a hold of. I suppose it's even things like the desire world, trying to get a hold of a desire without it wiggling away on you is like having oil-soaked hands trying to catch a fish live in the water. It's very hard to do. On top of that, the will is the least developed faculty that we have. Most people have very little will at all. And most people can change very few simple things in their lives. I've studied astrology for 60-some years now, and often the astrology was with people that I know on a day-to-day basis. And when you see that a person is going to be more excitable on a given day, or they're more likely to be cheery or persuadable or something on a given day, and there they are. Some people you can predict when they're going to be angry and what they're going to be angry about. And they don't have control of their lives. And those are desire world things. And the will is ever much more subtle than that. What most people do consider will is desire. They desire something so strongly that they can bring it about. There are problems with that, especially since we have a lower nature in the desire world, and especially since so many of our desires are egocentric. Trying to do things by desire gets you into trouble. I happen to be a very high desire person, and I have, by desire, gotten myself into situations that I wanted, and they were not what I wanted when I got into them. In fact, one of those things is going to come up in another one of the questions. This is a very ambitious question. Let's talk about this. These are extreme wishes. And wishes are somewhere in the lower part of the desire world. We have that old statement that if wishes were horses, then beggars were riders. Let's talk about the impossible one first. One cannot void cause and consequence because the act of voiding it is an act. And the law of cause and consequence is sometimes called the law of action, because every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And to try and nullify, an act of trying to nullify would have its consequences. I don't know about this because things about cause and consequence are some of the most difficult things of all to understand. We think we understand. We say, well, somebody got what was coming to them, but we don't always understand that right. There may be other reasons why things happen. That is, again, something that's going to come up in another one of the questions for this evening. But just for the sake of argument, one could nullify cause and consequence. The big question would be, Why would anyone want to do that? It would amount to impulsive actions that had no fulfillment, that had no meaning, that had no experience to them. It would be just throwing something away without knowing what would become of it or what would become of you for having thrown it away. Cause and consequence give us perfect feedback. That's important. If we didn't have cause and consequence, we could harm ourselves very badly if we just dashed out and didn't receive consequences. Now, this, as we all know, I'm deeply involved with Christian mysticism. And in Christian mysticism, we know that we can transcend the law. That is, to rise above the law. But any time that we rise above the law, we've entered into life spirit or a higher spiritual realm. But any time we do that, it's a totally different ballgame. I don't know how to say it. Take grace. Grace comes from life spirit. Grace enters and brings new causes into the stream of cause and consequence, but it does so from the fullness of love of the highest variety. And when we are dealing with transcending the law, we are attempting to get into a conscious state of grace. And grace, when it enters into the law, when we are forgiven something and given creative means from grace to change our conditions, it is always done out of that higher kind of love that understands the creation as only a creative being can understand it. It's a kind of, it's a very high kind of love. So, if you are above the law, you are, everything is different. We aspire to reaching that, but not selfishly. We aspire to reaching that because we've had a taste of honey, and we know that it is a wonderful thing and that it makes everything better for everyone. And that's why we aspire to it. However, once we are in a state of grace, once we are above the law, if we want to utilize it in these worlds in which we manifest, in the worlds of our desires or our physical world where there are so many limitations, once we project the state of grace into these worlds, it is subject to the law. The consequences that come back from it are undeniably extremely positive and pleasant, though there are often pains involved. We as human beings, whenever there's love, even romantic love, there's pain. And the pain is a consequence of a resistance of love. And so if we bring the love of grace into the world, we're likely to experience a lot of pain as well. Now, being able to even take ideas and project them into the world of cause and consequence, which we can do if we're operating from the abstract subdivision of the world of thought. We are creative beings. And that's what our destiny is. That's what our future is. Our future is to make this world a better place. And then to take everything that we've learned from this world and adapt it to higher worlds, the things that can be adapted. Now, when we institute changes and the changes are made in other than simple brute force changes, that is called, we call it magic. Magic is the ability to take higher power and higher wisdom and bring it to effect in this world rather rapidly. So at the end of this question, this questioner says, if we do have this, how can we bring it into this world quickly to make changes in this world? This person is a daydreamer. This person lives in wishes, but the daydreams and the wishes are not all bad wishes. This is a high-minded person. This person wants to make the world a better place, not just escape from it. And this person wonders how this can be done quickly. It's the same as the answer to how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. The simple spiritual exercises that we do, the concentration, the retrospection, the meditation, the visualization, these are all talents that we are developing. There is no difference between an adept, a high spiritual master, and you and I in what we have to work with. It's just that they have put in the work, and most of us have dawdled, and we haven't. It's a wonderful thing if you begin to realize that when you do have the power of concentration, and you can, with your will, set your thought on something and solve it. It's a wonderful feeling. You want more and more of that, especially if what you have done is helpful to the world and everyone in the world. So, that it is our destiny to become creators. If you want to call, I think a lot of painters call themselves magicians. I don't know about musical composers, but a lot of painters do. So, practice, practice, practice. A rather unusual set of questions, but a good set of questions. I don't think we're going to get done tonight, and there's going to be part 3 of questions and answers. I'm sorry, but I guess I'm slow. And it may be perverse, but I don't mind being slow. I like to get as much in that is relevant to a question as is possible. Next question, question 3. You had stated when discussing your life astrology that you had a post office job that you pushed to get into, and that pushing things that aren't meant to be is unwise. Can you elaborate and clarify what you mean by this and how you knew it wasn't meant to be? I have a friend who had 5 miscarriages in a row over several years. I thought she would give up trying, as it seemed carrying a pregnancy in her 40s wasn't meant to be. Eventually, her doctor figured out she didn't have enough progesterone because of her age to support the pregnancy. Prescribed it for her, and then she had a healthy pregnancy, delivery, and now has a robust, healthy adult child. There seemed to be no consequences in her pushing this. Earlier, I said that we have little will. And it's in many things in life, we don't have opportunities to express will. We are not completely automatons where we're just walking through what was planned for us, but it is much more like that than we think. We are living out something that we planned before we came to birth. We can improvise along the way, but there aren't always a lot of options, and we don't always find those options, and we don't always have the will to exercise in those opportunities. Now, before we come to birth, we plan our lives on past life experiences and as much as we can see of the divine plan that is being brought into manifestation in what we call the future. But when we plan our lives, it isn't linear. That what we did at the end of one life will be what we do at the beginning of the next. There is some of that, but it isn't linear. It isn't like a clockwork that this is going to happen this way and this way and this way. It's not like that. Moreover, a lot of us have put causes into effect that we are not strong enough to bear the consequences of. We have a backlog for most people, unfortunately, called the burden of sin. And we have a backlog of things that we have earned, of a positive, pleasant, powerful ability that we haven't had the opportunity to express either. So there are a lot of delayed reactions. And building the archetype, which is what we call the divine plan for a given rebirth, that we do that, and we do that with a lot of help. We do that with help from beings that are sometimes called the Lords of Destiny and sometimes called the recording angels. And they are, well, to us, perfect in their judgment, knowledge, and understanding. And they help us to design a life for our best. They understand how much hardship we can bear. They understand what positive things we can do for the world, and they help us to design a life accordingly. So some things are not from the immediate life before. Some things are maybe from several lives before we develop the talent, and then we set it aside while we develop something else, and now we can bring it into being. So it's not like a Newtonian world that we live in. It's better understood by studying chaos mathematics and chaos science, where things get done in a very fluid existence. Mind you now, that every thought every emotion, every action is taken into account. Now, normally, we have thought habits, and we develop clusters of thoughts that become like entities in their own. But nonetheless, every thought that has contributed to that is important. And sometimes one thought in one moment can change things significantly. I just had a moment over a half a year ago, that my attention wasn't perfect, and I took a fall, and I have a shattered wrist. It's changing my life quite a bit. So, at any rate, we have this archetype, this plan for life. Now, even though quite a bit of the design is dependent on the recording angels, even what they present to us for our life must have our consent. Because at this point, when we have become self-conscious so that we can make at least some choices for ourselves, if not all of them, the divine beings have to respect that. So what goes into the making of our lives, we must consent. But when this happens, we're in second and third heaven, and things are so beautiful there, and we understand things from a divine perspective there, which is very different from seeing it from an earthly perspective, that we consent to things that we very much rue when we get here. But even then, when the life is over, we don't rue them anymore, because we have the soul growth that comes out. Now, we do have some leeway. We are not automatons, and we can assert willpower. I could have asserted willpower better and kept my concentration and not slept on the ice and injured myself. But we can also assert ourselves in other ways. Not only with willpower, we can do so with desire. And at one point, I didn't know what was for me in the near future. But somehow I had this notion in my mind that I wanted to work for the post office. And I manifest an extreme desire to do so. And I did. I had enough desire that I could do that. When I got to the post office, it was a good job. Had I stayed with the post office, I would have had an early and very healthy retirement. But I didn't know what was before me. And I didn't keep my spiritual life at the center of my attention. I got this glamorous picture of working for the post office, and I let that distract my attention from a spiritual life. When I got to working for the post office, and in my hours when I wasn't working for the post office, I was interacting with people with whom I could share my true spiritual nature, and they could share theirs. And I realized that the post office was not for me, and that was an abuse of the ability to desire something. And how do I know that? That was part of the question. How do I know that? There are a lot of things that we know in life that we can't intellectually explain. It isn't an exact intuition, but it isn't far from an intuition, or it's an intuition of a different kind. But you understand that you're doing something out of character. You're doing something out of what your capacity of life is supposed to be. And that is how I knew that. All right, now let's get on to the other part of the question, talking about the woman who had a number of pregnancies, 5 miscarriages. And then the doctor suggested the use of progesterone. That's not the same thing. This person, neither this person nor the doctor willed this to be. They were trying whatever was possible. And they eventually hit on a physical solution. But there probably is much more than that physical solution of progesterone. One of my favorite quotes is from Hamlet, where he says, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than your philosophy knows of." I'll tell a story from someone else who had miscarriages, someone who was studied by a valid clairvoyant, a controlled clairvoyant. And this woman had 2 or 3 either miscarriages or death in infancy. And then, after those 3 incidences, she changed her life. She had been an unbeliever and somehow recognized that, this is again, not knowing the way we know that 2 + 2 is 4, but somehow knew that it was the same being that was coming back to her again and again and dying in infancy or in miscarriage. Excuse me. I don't know if I want to edit that out or not. It's a hard thing to edit a sneeze out of a long video. And then that recognition, without having ever read a book about mysticism or rebirth or anything like that, she sensed that the same focus of life was coming back to her again and again, and she became a spiritual believer. And when she became a spiritual believer, her whole life changed. And then she conceived, bore the child, and the child had a healthy life. The being that was being reborn and reborn again and again made a tremendous sacrifice. It is a huge sacrifice to go through the whole interuterine period, 9 months of being in someone's body, very cramped conditions, and did that 3 times just to get a point across. That is a sacrifice. It was successful. So when we have this woman who has 5 miscarriages, that isn't just a physical problem. I don't know what it is because I don't know the individual. I don't have the horoscope, and I haven't been able to interact with the individual. But I'm sure it was not just a physical progesterone problem. There's probably something much more behind it. I know that's what some people would say, but I can't necessarily say that I would agree with it. Some people would say that this was somebody who did abortions in a past life and had experienced miscarriages in lieu of abortions, 5 of them before getting a chance to come through, and maybe learned a lesson, and after the 5th one the progesterone came in. That's what some people would say, but I can't say that because I don't have knowledge. But I offer that as one potential answer to why the 5 miscarriages, a more spiritual reason why the 5 miscarriages. The person who asked this question knows the woman with the 5 miscarriages and may have a better understanding of it, what it meant for both the incoming entity and the mother of that entity. All right. I'm having a good time with this. We're at almost an hour already, and we barely have gotten started. And this one looks like a shorter question. What do you think about or mean when you say living by faith or living a life of faith? If possible, please explain this one simply as possible to the lowest common denominator, me. Simplicity is not one of my talents. As we become more intellectually aware, we often become insecure and neurotic. We know what we know, but in every acquisition of knowledge, we have a whole lot of more questions that we don't know. And if we are not cultivating a spiritual life, a life of inner commune, a life of spiritual purpose, our mind gets ahead, and we're living basically materialistically. We have all these unanswered questions. We know what we know, but we know that there's a whole lot that we don't know. And if we don't have the spiritual connection, we are insecure. We are insecure about the unknown. And faith, living by faith, means that we don't deny that there are things we don't know. And we don't deny that they couldn't be harmful to us. But we don't dwell on them in insecurity. We don't let our ignorance rob us of our presence of consciousness in the moment. So living a life of faith is trusting that the spirit that we commune with